Every Sunday at exactly 2:47 p.m., two small figures appeared at Riverside Memorial Gardens in Portland, Oregon. Rain or shine, summer heat or winter frost, they came with the same quiet determination that had puzzled groundskeeper Ben Martinez for over 8 months. The twins, identical in every way except for the color of their worn sneakers, one wore faded red, the other blue, carried fresh daisies in their tiny hands and whispered secrets to a simple granite headstone before walking away hand in hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Ben didn't know was that 50 yards away, behind the tinted windows of a black Tesla Model S, sat Marcus Blackwell, one of the Pacific Northwest's most ruthless tech moguls, watching their ritual with an intensity that had begun to consume his thoughts. The man who had built an empire worth $3 billion through calculated risks and merciless business decisions found himself scheduling his entire week around these 7 precious minutes when 2 children taught him something about love. He'd never understood. Marcus Blackwell had always believed that power was measured in zeros, bank account zeros, company valuation zeros, the zeros that followed his net worth in Forbes magazine. At 42, he had achieved everything his younger self had dreamed of when he'd coded his first software program in his cramped Seattle studio apartment 20 years ago. BlackTech Industries now employed over 15,000 people across 6 continents, their cloud computing solutions powering half the world's major corporations. Yet as he sat in his corner office on the 38th floor of the BlackTech Tower in downtown Portland, staring out at the Columbia River through floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus felt emptier than he had during those early days when he'd survived. On instant ramen and determination, his executive assistant had just informed him that the Henderson Industries acquisition was complete, adding another $200 million to his portfolio. But the news landed with the emotional impact of someone reading him a grocery list. The irony wasn't lost on him. The more successful he became, the more isolated he felt. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city like a modern castle, but castles were built to keep people out as much as to protect those within. He'd learned that lesson the hard way 3 years ago when his marriage to Victoria imploded in a very public divorce that had filled the business journals for months. She'd taken half his liquid assets and all of his trust in romantic relationships, leaving him with a prenup protected company and a heart he'd decided was better left uninvested. Marcus closed his laptop and walked to the windows, his reflection ghost-like against the afternoon sky. At 6'2" with graying temples that his stylist insisted made him look distinguished, he cut an imposing figure in his custom-tailored suits. But beneath the expensive fabric and confident exterior, he felt increasingly like a man playing a role he'd outgrown. The boardroom victories that once thrilled him now felt routine. The luxury that once motivated him now felt meaningless. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Reminder, Dr. Chen appointment at 4 p.m. regarding the Barrett Foundation board meeting. Marcus sighed, remembering he'd committed to joining the Children's Charity Board, not out of passion, but because his PR team insisted he needed to soften his public image. The foundation operated out of a modest building just blocks from Riverside Memorial Gardens, which was how he'd first discovered the cemetery that would change everything. The appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, the foundation's director, was scheduled to discuss his potential involvement in their new literacy program for underprivileged children. Marcus had agreed to the meeting primarily because his accountant had explained the tax benefits of charitable giving. But as he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, he found himself oddly curious about the work they did. Perhaps it was time to find meaning beyond profit margins and market dominance. Dr. Chen turned out to be a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent years fighting for causes larger than herself. Her office was a study in organized chaos, with children's artwork covering the walls and stacks of grant applications covering every available surface. The contrast to Marcus's minimalist executive suite couldn't have been starker. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, standing to shake his hand with a grip that spoke of quiet strength, "thank you for considering joining our board. I know your time is valuable." Marcus settled into a well-worn chair across from her desk, noting how the furniture here was chosen for comfort rather than intimidation. "Please call me Marcus. I'll admit, Dr. Chen, that my knowledge of charitable work is limited. My involvement has historically been more financial than personal." Dr. Chen smiled, an expression that transformed her face completely. "That's honest, and honesty is something we value here. Many of our board members started exactly where you are. But I should warn you, working with children has a way of changing people in ways they don't expect." As she spoke about the Foundation's programs, showing him photographs of children in reading circles and art classes, Marcus found himself genuinely engaged for the first time in months. These weren't quarterly reports or market analyses. These were real stories about real children whose lives had been transformed by education and support. "We work primarily with children who've experienced trauma or loss," Dr. Chen explained, pulling out a folder of testimonials. "Many have lost parents, been through foster care, or witnessed domestic violence. We found that creative expression and literacy programs help them process their experiences in healthy ways." One photograph caught Marcus's attention. Two identical little girls, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, sat at a small table covered in art supplies, their dark hair in matching braids, their faces serious with concentration as they worked on what appeared to be greeting cards. Something about their expression struck him as both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Those are the Morrison twins," Dr. Chen said, noticing his focus. "Lucy and Lily. They've been with us for about a year now. Their story is particularly touching." Marcus found himself leaning forward. "What happened to them?" Dr. Chen's expression grew solemn. "They lost their mother in a car accident when they were 4. Their father wasn't in the picture, and their grandmother, who took them in, was already struggling with her own health issues. The girls were very close to their mother, and her death left them almost completely nonverbal for months. We've been working with them on art therapy and reading programs." "And their grandmother?" "Margaret Morrison is a wonderful woman, but she's 73 and dealing with diabetes and heart problems. She loves those girls fiercely, but she worries constantly about what will happen to them if her health fails. That's actually how they found us initially. She was looking for support programs, ways to help the girls process their grief." Marcus stared at the photograph, something stirring in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. The girls' serious expressions reminded him of his own childhood. Though his circumstances had been different, he'd lost his parents when he was 12, not to death, but to their own ambitions. They'd shipped him off to boarding school while they pursued academic careers that took them around the world, leaving him to navigate adolescence surrounded by strangers in expensive institutions. "Where do they live?" he heard himself asking. "In southeast Portland, near Riverside Memorial Gardens. Margaret brings them to our programs twice a week, and they've made remarkable progress. They're speaking more now, especially to each other, and their artwork has become quite sophisticated for their age." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mention of Riverside Memorial Gardens sent a jolt through Marcus. He'd driven past the cemetery countless times on his way to various business meetings, but had never paid it much attention until recently. The foundation building was indeed just a few blocks away, which explained why he'd noticed it. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Chen walked him through the building, showing him classrooms where children worked on reading skills and art studios where they expressed their emotions. Through paint and clay, Marcus found himself making mental notes about improvements that could be made with proper funding, better equipment, expanded programs. "I'd like to join your board," he said as they returned to her office. "And I'd like to make a substantial donation to start, say $5 million to begin with." Dr. Chen's composure cracked for just a moment, her eyes widening before she recovered her professional demeanor. "That's extraordinarily generous, Marcus. Are you certain?" Marcus nodded, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "I am. But I have one condition. I'd like to be more involved than a typical board member. I want to understand the day-to-day operations, maybe even volunteer directly with the children, if that's appropriate." "Of course," Dr. Chen said warmly. "We always need volunteers, especially for our weekend programs. In fact, we have a reading circle every Saturday morning that could use additional help." As Marcus left the foundation that afternoon, his mind was buzzing with possibilities he hadn't considered in years. For the first time in months, he felt energized by something other than a business deal. The drive back to his office took him past Riverside Memorial Gardens, and almost without thinking, he slowed down, his eyes scanning the peaceful grounds through the iron gates. That night, alone in his penthouse with the city lights stretching endlessly below, Marcus found himself thinking about the Morrison twins. Their serious expressions in the photograph haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was their obvious bond, the way they leaned toward each other even while focused on their individual projects. He'd never experienced that kind of connection with another person, that wordless understanding that seemed to exist between them. He'd grown up as an only child in a house where emotional expression was seen as weakness, where love was measured in achievements rather than affection. His parents had provided every material advantage, but had been emotionally distant, more interested in his grades and future prospects than his thoughts or feelings. By the time he'd reached adulthood, he'd learned to equate success with worth, accomplishment with love. His marriage to Victoria had been built on similar foundations. They'd been a power couple in Portland's social scene, their relationship more about shared ambitions and social status than genuine emotional connection. When it ended, Marcus had told himself he was relieved to be free of the complications that came with trying to merge two demanding careers and strong personalities. But looking at that photograph of Lucy and Lily Morrison, seeing the way they instinctively supported each other, Marcus felt a longing he'd spent years suppressing. What would it be like to have someone who cared about you, not for what you could provide or achieve, but simply for who you were? What would it be like to be someone's most important person, their source of comfort and security? The next Saturday morning found Marcus walking through the doors of the Barrett Foundation for his first volunteer shift. He'd traded his usual business attire for khakis and a button-down shirt, feeling oddly nervous about interacting with the children. Dr. Chen had assured him that the reading circle was informal and welcoming, but Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd spent time around children. The reading room was bright and colorful, with oversized cushions arranged in a circle on a cheerful rug. 8 children, ranging in age from 5 to 10, sat waiting with picture books in their laps, their faces curious as they evaluated the new volunteer. Marcus introduced himself simply as Mr. Marcus and took a seat on one of the adult-sized chairs that had been placed among the cushions. "Today, we're going to take turns reading our favorite stories," explained Linda, the program coordinator, who'd been leading these sessions for 5 years. "Some of our friends are still learning their letters, so we help each other. Mr. Marcus, would you like to start us off?" Marcus had brought a book he'd loved as a child, one of the few gifts his parents had given him that he'd treasured, The Giving Tree, by Shel Silverstein felt appropriate for this setting, though as he began reading aloud, he found new meaning in the words he'd memorized decades ago. The story of unconditional love and sacrifice took on different weight when read to children who understood loss in ways most adults never would. As he read, Marcus noticed two familiar faces among the group. Lucy and Lily Morrison sat side by side on a large purple cushion, their identical features focused intently on his words. They were even more striking in person than in the photograph, with enormous dark eyes and expressions that seemed far too serious for 6-year-olds. When he finished reading, little hands shot up with comments and questions, but the twins remained silent, watching him with an intensity that made him feel as though they were seeing straight through to something he'd hidden, even from himself. The session continued with other children taking turns reading, some struggling with simple sentences, while others tackled chapter books with impressive fluency. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the experience, laughing at their interpretations of stories and marveling at their insights. Children, he realized, saw things with a clarity that adults often lost in the complexity of daily life. When the formal reading time ended, most of the children migrated to other activities, but Lucy and Lily remained on their cushion, whispering to each other in voices too low for Marcus to hear. Linda approached them with gentle encouragement. "Girls, would you like to share your book today? You've been working so hard on reading it." The twins looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that seemed to be their primary form of communication. Finally, Lucy, identifiable by a small scar on her chin that her sister lacked, held up a picture book about flowers. "We like this one because it tells about different flowers and what they mean," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "That's wonderful," Marcus said, settling back into his chair. "I'd love to hear about it." Lily took over, her voice slightly stronger than her sister's. "Daisies mean new beginnings and innocence. Mom always said daisies were happy flowers because they looked like little suns." Marcus felt something catch in his throat at the mention of their mother. "Your mom sounds like she was very wise." "She was," Lucy said simply. "She knew everything about flowers and what they meant. She taught us that when you give someone flowers, you're giving them a message, even if you don't say the words." "Oh, what other flowers did she teach you about?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. The twins spent the next 10 minutes sharing their mother's flower wisdom with him. Roses meant love, but different colors meant different kinds of love. Forget-me-nots were for remembrance. Lilies represented rebirth and new life. As they spoke, their voices grew slightly stronger, their posture more confident. "We bring daisies to Mom every week," Lily said as the session was winding down, "because we want her to know we're okay and that every day is a new beginning like she taught us." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "You visit your mom?" "Every Sunday at 2:30, Lucy confirmed. "Grandma Margaret takes us to the cemetery and we tell Mom about our week and leave her fresh daisies." "She's at Riverside Memorial Gardens," Lily added. "It's very peaceful there. The groundskeeper is nice and always says hello to us." The rest of Marcus's Saturday passed in a blur of distraction. He attended a business dinner that evening, making appropriate conversation about market trends and investment opportunities. But his mind kept returning to two little girls who brought daisies to their mother's grave every Sunday. The image haunted him with its simple beauty and devastating sadness. Sunday afternoon found Marcus sitting in his Tesla in the parking lot of Riverside Memorial Gardens, feeling like a voyeur but unable to resist the pull to witness their ritual. He'd arrived at 2:15, positioning his car where he could see the main paths through the cemetery without being too obvious. The day was overcast, typical for October in Portland, with a light mist that made everything look soft and dreamlike. At exactly 2:30, he saw them. An elderly woman with silver hair moved slowly along the main path, holding the hands of two small figures in matching yellow raincoats. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the bright splash of white daisies in one of the twins' free hands. He watched as they made their way to a grave, about 100 yards from his position, near a grove of maple trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn autumn colors. The grandmother, whom he assumed was Margaret, settled onto a small portable stool she'd carried with her, while the twins knelt beside the headstone. For nearly 10 minutes, they remained there. Marcus couldn't hear their words, but he could see the gestures, the way they took turns speaking, how they carefully arranged the daisies against the stone. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about their devotion, their weekly pilgrimage to maintain connection with someone they'd lost. When they finally stood to leave, Marcus felt an unexpected urge to follow them, to somehow insert himself into their world. Instead, he remained in his car until they disappeared from sight, then sat in the growing darkness trying to understand why two children he barely knew had affected him so profoundly. The following weeks established a pattern that Marcus didn't fully acknowledge, even to himself. His Saturday morning volunteer sessions at the Barrett Foundation became the highlight of his week, and his Sunday afternoon drives past Riverside. Memorial Gardens became a ritual as regular as the twins' cemetery visits. He began timing his arrival to coincide with theirs, telling himself he was simply curious about their routine. Lucy and Lily gradually warmed to him during the reading sessions. They began volunteering to read aloud more often, and occasionally, one of them would approach him after the formal activities ended to share something they'd learned or ask his opinion about a book. Their grandmother started attending the sessions as well, and Marcus learned that Margaret Morrison was indeed struggling with health issues, but was fiercely devoted to her granddaughters. "Those girls are my whole world," she confided to Marcus one Saturday as they watched the twins help younger children with their reading. "I worry about what will happen to them if something happens to me. Their mother was my only child, and there's no other family." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest at her words. "Have you considered legal guardianship arrangements? Making sure there's a plan in place?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Mr. Marcus, I can barely afford their basic needs on my social security. Legal planning is a luxury I can't afford. I just pray every day that I stay healthy long enough to see them grown." That evening, Marcus made several phone calls to attorneys he knew, inquiring about pro bono services for guardianship planning. By Monday morning, he'd arranged for one of Portland's top family law firms to provide free consultation and documentation for Margaret Morrison, with Marcus quietly covering any costs the firm wouldn't absorb. His Sunday surveillance continued. Though he'd begun to think of it less as watching and more as sharing in their ritual, he'd learned their pattern perfectly. They arrived at 2:30 and stayed until 2:50. The twins always brought fresh daisies, and they always spent time in what appeared to be conversation with their mother's grave. Margaret usually brought a small thermos of tea and would sit quietly while the girls had their private time. On a particularly rainy Sunday in November, Marcus noticed that Margaret seemed to be struggling more than usual. She moved slowly and had to rest twice on the walk from the parking area to the gravesite. The twins, perhaps sensing their grandmother's difficulty, stayed closer to her than usual and seemed to cut their visit shorter than normal. As they made their way back toward the parking area, Marcus watched Margaret stumble slightly, catching herself against a tree. The twins immediately blanked her, their small hands reaching up to steady her arms. The image of two 6-year-olds trying to care for their elderly grandmother stirred something protective in Marcus that he'd never experienced before. That night, he called Dr. Chen at home, something he'd never done before. "Sarah, it's Marcus. Blackwell, I'm sorry to bother you on a Sunday evening, but I wanted to ask about the Morrison family. Margaret seemed unwell today, and I'm concerned about her ability to care for the twins if her health deteriorates." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but I have to ask why you're monitoring their activities. Outside of our programs, the question hung in the air, and Marcus realized he didn't have a good answer. How could he explain that watching two little girls honor their mother's memory had become the most meaningful part of his week? How could he describe the way their simple ritual had awakened something in him that he'd thought was permanently dormant? I don't know, he said finally. I can't explain it, but those girls have gotten under my skin somehow. The thought of them losing Margaret too, of being placed in foster care or separated, it keeps me awake at night. Marcus, Dr. Chen said gently, I think you need to be very careful here. Your concern is touching, but you're essentially a stranger to these children. If you want to help, there are appropriate channels through our foundation. Marcus knew she was right, but her warning didn't diminish his growing obsession with the Morrison family's welfare. He began researching foster care statistics, learning about the challenges faced by siblings who lost their guardians, the trauma of separation and institutional care. The more he learned, the more determined he became to somehow ensure that Lucy and Lily would never face those experiences. His business began to suffer from his distraction. Meetings he would normally dominate with focused intensity became exercises in going through the motions, while his mind wandered to too little, girls and their weekly pilgrimage. His assistant started booking him lighter schedules, assuming he was dealing with some kind of personal crisis. In early December, Margaret Morrison collapsed during a grocery shopping trip and was hospitalized with what doctors determined was a mild heart attack. Dr. Chen called Marcus that evening with the news, knowing he'd want to be informed about the twins' situation. They're staying with Margaret in the hospital tonight, but we need to make arrangements for them if she needs extended care, Dr. Chen explained. I've contacted social services, but the process is complicated when the guardian is hospitalized. What about their Sunday visits? Marcus asked, surprising Dr. Chen with the specificity of his concern. Marcus, I think we need to focus on immediate housing and care arrangements rather than... No, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority he used in boardrooms. You don't understand. Those visits aren't just routine for them. They're how they maintain their connection to their mother, how they process their grief. If we disrupt that, we could undo months of progress. There was a long silence before Dr. Chen spoke again. Marcus, I think it's time you and I had a serious conversation about your involvement with this family. The next morning, Marcus sat across from Dr. Chen in her office, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. She'd asked him to come in before the hospital visit she'd planned to check on Margaret and the twins. Marcus, your generosity to our foundation has been extraordinary, and your volunteer work has been genuinely helpful, she began carefully. But I'm concerned about your focus on this one family. Your interest seems to have moved beyond normal charitable concern. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you might want to examine why these particular children have captured your attention so completely. In my experience, when adults become fixated on specific children who aren't their own, it's often because those children represent something unresolved in their own lives. The observation hit Marcus like a physical blow because he recognized its truth immediately. Lucy and Lily Morrison, in their quiet devotion to their mother's memory and their fierce protection of each other, represented everything he'd never had and everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. What if I wanted to help them more? Directly, he asked quietly. What if I wanted to ensure they never had to worry about housing or education or being separated? Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. Marcus, are you talking about adoption? The word hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized that yes, That was exactly what he was talking about. Somehow, over the course of 3 months, he'd begun thinking of Lucy and Lily Morrison not as charity cases to be helped, but as children who belonged in his life permanently. Would that be possible? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Legally, if Margaret were unable to care for them, and if she consented, adoption would be possible, Dr. Chen said carefully. But Marcus, these children don't know you as anything more than a volunteer reader. They're not looking for a new father. They're grieving their mother and trying to maintain stability with their grandmother. But if Margaret's health continues to deteriorate, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Dr. Chen interrupted firmly, and any decisions about their future will be made with their best interests as the primary concern, not the desires of well-meaning adults. Marcus left the foundation that morning feeling chastened, but not deterred. He'd named the feeling that had been growing in his chest for months, and now that he'd acknowledged it, he couldn't pretend it away. He wanted to be Lucy and Lily Morrison's father. He wanted to be the person they turned to for comfort, guidance, and security. He wanted to be the one who helped them honor their mother's memory while building new memories together. The realization terrified him because it required him to acknowledge how empty his life had become, how desperately he longed for connection and purpose beyond profit margins and market dominance. These 2 little girls, with their weekly ritual of love and remembrance, had shown him what he'd been missing all along. But Dr. Chen was right about one thing. Lucy and Lily Morrison barely knew him, and he had no right to insert himself into their lives based on his own emotional needs. If he truly cared about their welfare, he needed to find a way to help them that honored their autonomy and their existing bonds. That Sunday, as he sat in his usual spot watching their cemetery visit, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of remaining a distant observer, he was going to introduce himself to Margaret Morrison and offer his help directly. Whatever happened next, he couldn't continue living as a shadow in their lives while pretending his feelings didn't exist. The twins had just finished arranging their daisies and were settling in for their quiet conversation with their mother, when Marcus stepped out of his car and began walking toward them across the cemetery grounds. His heart pounded with each step, knowing that this moment would determine whether he became a part of their story or remained forever on its periphery. As he approached, Margaret looked up from her thermos of tea, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness as she recognized him from the foundation, but couldn't place why he would be at the cemetery. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said softly, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm Marcus Blackwell from the Barrett Foundation. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to check on how you're feeling after your hospital stay." Lucy and Lily looked up from their conversation with their mother's grave, their identical faces showing confusion at seeing their reading circle volunteer in this sacred space. "Mr. Marcus," Lily said, her voice uncertain, "what are you doing here?" The question held layers of meaning that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to answer. What was he doing here? Was he helping or intruding? Was he following his heart or indulging his own needs at the expense of a grieving family? As he looked into 3 pairs of eyes that held varying degrees of surprise, wariness, and confusion, Marcus realized that his journey with the Morrison family was just beginning, and that the next words out of his mouth would determine whether that journey led to healing or heartbreak for all of them. The silence stretched between them like a bridge that Marcus wasn't sure how to cross. Margaret Morrison's weathered face showed a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, clearly grateful for his concern about her health, but puzzled by his presence at what was obviously a deeply personal family ritual. The twins had moved slightly, closer to their grandmother, their protective instincts activated by the unexpected intrusion into their sacred space. "I apologize if I'm intruding," Marcus said carefully, his usual commanding presence replaced by genuine uncertainty. "I was driving by and saw you walking, and after hearing about your hospital stay, I wanted to make sure you were managing okay. The girls mentioned they visit their mother here every Sunday." Margaret's expression softened slightly at his explanation, though her eyes remained watchful. "That's kind of you, Mr. Blackwell. I'm feeling much better, thank you. The doctors said it was a mild episode, probably brought on by stress and not taking proper care of myself." Lucy stepped forward, her small hand finding her grandmother's arm in a gesture that spoke of premature maturity. "Grandma Margaret has been taking her medicine and eating better," she said solemnly. "We help her remember." The protective tone in the 6-year-old's voice hit Marcus squarely in the chest. These children had already experienced too much loss, too much responsibility for their age. They shouldn't have to worry about whether their grandmother was taking her medication or managing her diet. "That's very responsible of you both," Marcus said, kneeling down to bring himself to their eye level. "Your grandmother is lucky to have you looking out for her." Lily, who had been studying him with her analytical gaze, tilted her head slightly. "Why were you driving by the cemetery, Mr. Marcus? Do you visit someone here too?" The innocent question pierced through Marcus's careful explanations and forced him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. Why had he been driving by? He had no family buried here, no legitimate reason to be in this neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, except for his growing obsession with watching their weekly ritual. "No," he said honestly, "I don't visit anyone here. I was just thinking about you girls after the reading session yesterday, wondering how you were doing with your grandmother's health scare." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at this admission. It was unusual for a volunteer to follow up on the children's personal lives outside of the program, and Marcus could see her trying to determine whether his interest was appropriate or concerning. "The girls have told me about your reading sessions," she said carefully. "They enjoy them very much. Lucy especially has been reading more at home since you started volunteering." Marcus felt a warm glow at this information. Making a positive impact on their literacy development felt like a genuine accomplishment, something concrete he could point to as justification for his involvement in their lives. "I enjoy working with them too," he said. "They're both remarkably bright and thoughtful. You've done an excellent job raising them." A shadow crossed Margaret's face at these words. "I can't take credit for that," she said quietly. "Their mother, Catherine, she was the one who shaped them in their early years. I'm just trying to honor her memory by keeping them safe and loved." Catherine. Marcus filed away the name, adding another piece to the puzzle of this family's history. He'd been so focused on the twins that he'd never thought to ask about their mother's name, what she'd been like, how she'd died. "Would you tell me about her?" he asked gently, "if that's not too personal a question." The twins exchanged glances, and Marcus saw a flicker of the silent communication that seemed to be their primary form of decision-making. Finally, Lucy nodded almost imperceptibly to her sister. "Mom was a kindergarten teacher," Lily said, her voice soft but clear. "She loved children and flowers and making people feel special." "She read to us every night," Lucy added. "Different voices for all the characters. She could make the wolf sound really scary and the princess sound really brave." Margaret's eyes grew misty as the girls spoke about their mother. "Catherine was my daughter-in-law, but she was more like my own child. My son died when the girls were babies, and Catherine could have taken them and started fresh somewhere else. Instead, she stayed close so the girls could know their father's family." Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. The twins had lost their father as infants and their mother as toddlers, leaving them with only their elderly grandmother. The magnitude of loss these small children had endured was staggering. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Marcus said, meaning every word. She was, Margaret agreed, and she would have wanted the girls to remember her with joy, not just sadness. That's why we come here every week, isn't it, girls? To celebrate her memory, not just mourn her absence. The twins nodded solemnly, and Marcus understood that their weekly ritual was more complex than he'd realized. It wasn't just about grief. It was about maintaining an active relationship with their mother's memory, keeping her present in their lives even though she was gone. "What do you tell her when you visit?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the content of their conversations. "We tell her about school and our friends and what we learned in reading circle," Lily explained. "And we tell her about Grandma Margaret's health and how we're taking care of each other. Sometimes we ask her questions too," Lucy added, "about what she would want us to do or how she would handle problems we're having." "And do you get answers?" Marcus asked, fascinated by their emotional sophistication. The twins looked at each other again, another silent consultation taking place. "Sometimes," Lily said finally, "not out loud, but sometimes we just know what she would say." Marcus felt his throat tighten at the simple faith in their words. These children had found a way to maintain a living relationship with their deceased mother, to continue drawing guidance and comfort from her memory. It was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "That's a wonderful way to honor her," he said. "I think she would be very proud of how you're taking care of each other and your grandmother." The conversation might have continued, but Marcus noticed that Margaret was beginning to look tired, her face pale despite the cool November air. Standing for extended periods was clearly becoming difficult for her. "Mrs. Morrison, would you like me to drive you home?" he offered. "I have my car right here, and it might be more comfortable than walking back to yours." Margaret hesitated, clearly weighing the propriety of accepting a ride from someone she barely knew against her obvious fatigue. "That's very kind," she said finally. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," Marcus assured her, already walking toward his Tesla while the trio gathered Margaret's small bag and thermos. As they settled into his car, Marcus was acutely aware of how different this felt from his usual Sunday afternoons. Instead of watching from a distance, he was now inside their world, however briefly. The twins chatted quietly in the back seat about their week ahead, their voices creating a gentle soundtrack that filled the luxury vehicle with something it had never contained before: the sound of family. Margaret directed him to a modest duplex in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but still maintained an air of dignity and care. The small front yard was neatly maintained despite the season, and Marcus could see children's artwork displayed in the front windows. "Would you like to come in for tea?" Margaret asked, as they prepared to get out of the car. "It's the least I can do to thank you for the ride." Marcus hesitated, knowing that accepting the invitation would cross another line in his evolving relationship with this family. But the genuine warmth in Margaret's offer and the hopeful expressions on the twins' faces made the decision for him. "I'd like that very much," he said. The interior of the duplex was small but immaculately maintained, with every surface showing evidence of Margaret's care and attention. The living room was dominated by a large bookshelf filled with children's books and family photographs, and Marcus found himself drawn to the images of a young woman he assumed was Catherine. "That's Mom," Lucy said, noticing his attention. "That picture was taken right before we were born." The photograph showed a radiant woman in her late 20s, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her hands resting on her very pregnant belly. Her smile was luminous, full of joy and anticipation for the future that would be cut tragically short. "She's beautiful," Marcus said honestly. "You both look very much like her." "Everyone says that," Lily agreed. "Grandma Margaret says we..." have her eyes and her stubborn streak. Margaret emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tea service that was clearly one of her prized possessions. The china was delicate and old-fashioned, the kind passed down through generations and brought out only for special occasions. "I hope you don't mind chamomile," she said as she poured. "It's about all I can manage these days. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Marcus noticed the slight tremor in her movements and felt another surge of concern for this family's stability. Margaret was clearly doing her best, but the combination of her age and health issues created a precarious situation for the twins. As they sipped their tea, the conversation naturally turned to the girls' progress in school and their various activities. Marcus learned that Lucy was particularly gifted in art, while Lily showed exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science. Both were reading well above their grade level, a fact that made him proud, even though he could claim no credit for their early development. Their mother started reading to them before they were even born, Margaret explained. She believed that early exposure to language and stories would give them advantages throughout their lives. She was clearly right, Marcus observed, watching the twins as they politely participated in the adult conversation while also engaging in their wordless communication with each other. "They're good girls," Margaret said, her voice carrying the weight of love and worry. "Sometimes I think they're too good, too responsible for their age. They worry about me more than children should have to worry about their guardian." Lucy looked up from her teacup with solemn eyes. "We just want to make sure you're okay, Grandma Margaret. We don't want to lose you, too." The simple statement hung in the air like a confession, revealing the depth of anxiety these small children carried. They were hyper-vigilant about their grandmother's health because they understood, with the clarity that comes from experience, that losing her would mean losing everything familiar and safe in their world. Marcus felt something shift inside him as he absorbed the full weight of their situation. These weren't just children who needed help with reading or financial support for activities. These were two little girls living in constant fear of another devastating loss, trying to be strong enough to protect the only family they had left. "You know," he said carefully, "there are people who could help make sure your grandmother stays healthy, doctors who specialize in helping people with heart conditions, services that could make daily life easier for all of you." Margaret's expression grew wary again. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your concern, but we manage just fine. I don't want charity, and I don't want the girls to feel like they're a burden to anyone." "It wouldn't be charity," Marcus said gently. "It would be community support. There are programs specifically designed to help families in situations like yours, and accessing them isn't any different from using the library or the school system." The twins were watching this exchange with sharp attention, clearly understanding that something important was being discussed, even if they couldn't grasp all the implications. "What kind of help?" Lily asked, her analytical mind engaging with the problem. Marcus looked to Margaret for permission before answering. When she nodded reluctantly, he continued. "Well, there are services that could help with grocery shopping and house cleaning, medical monitoring systems that could alert doctors if your grandmother needed help, even transportation services for medical appointments or other errands." "Would we still live here?" Lucy asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Of course," Marcus assured her quickly. "These services are designed to help families stay together in their own homes. The goal is to make life easier and safer, not to change where you live." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with her pride and her practical concerns. Finally, she spoke. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to learn more about what's available," she said reluctantly. "Not that I'm committing to anything, but information never hurt anyone." Marcus felt a surge of triumph that he carefully kept from showing on his face. This was a significant step forward, an acknowledgement that the family needed more support than Margaret could provide alone. As the afternoon wound down, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave the warmth and relative normalcy of the Morrison household. The duplex felt more like a home than his penthouse had ever managed to achieve, filled with love and laughter despite the challenges its inhabitants faced. "Thank you for the tea," he said as he prepared to leave, "and for letting me share a little bit of your Sunday afternoon." "Thank you for caring," Margaret replied, and Marcus could see that she meant it despite her earlier wariness. "It's been a long time since anyone outside our little family showed genuine interest in our welfare." The twins walked him to the door, their earlier shyness having largely evaporated during the course of the visit. "Will we see you at reading circle next Saturday?" Lily asked. "Absolutely," Marcus confirmed. "I wouldn't miss it." "Maybe you could bring another book like the one about the tree," Lucy suggested. "One with a good message about taking care of people you love." The request hit Marcus with unexpected force. These children were actively seeking stories that would help them understand and process their own experiences with love, loss, and responsibility. They weren't just learning to read, they were learning to live. "I'll find the perfect book," he promised, already mentally cataloging options that would speak to their experiences. As he drove home through the early evening darkness, Marcus found himself thinking about the profound difference between watching the Morrison family from a distance and actually being invited into their world, however briefly. The intimacy of sharing tea in their living room, of seeing Catherine's photographs and hearing stories about her life, of witnessing the complex dynamics between grandmother and granddaughters, had transformed his understanding of who they were and what they needed. More importantly, it had forced him to confront the question of what role he could legitimately play in their lives. He was no longer content to be a distant observer or even a friendly volunteer. He wanted to be genuinely helpful, to make a real difference in their daily reality. But he also recognized that his desires had to be balanced against their autonomy and their existing relationships. That night, Marcus made a series of phone calls that would begin the process of connecting the Morrison family with support services. He contacted social workers who specialized in aging issues, medical coordinators who could help Margaret manage her health more effectively, and family service organizations that could provide practical assistance without stigma or bureaucracy. But as he made these calls, Marcus also found himself researching something else entirely: family law in Oregon, specifically the process for single adults to adopt children whose guardians were unable to continue caring for them. Not because he intended to pursue such a drastic step, but because he needed to understand all the possibilities that might lie ahead for Lucy and Lily if Margaret's health continued to deteriorate. The following week brought a new routine to Marcus's life. Instead of simply attending Saturday reading sessions, he began arriving early to help set up and staying late to assist with cleanup. This gave him additional opportunities to interact with the twins and to observe their behavior in different contexts. He noticed that Lucy was more outgoing in group settings, but became quieter and more introspective when discussing emotional topics. Lily, conversely, was reserved during large group activities, but opened up when engaged in one-on-one conversations about subjects that interested her. Both girls showed remarkable empathy for the other children in the program, often helping struggling readers or comforting younger children who became frustrated. Dr. Chen had been watching Marcus's increased involvement with a mixture of approval and concern. His dedication was clearly beneficial to the program, but she remained worried about his specific focus on the Morrison family. "Marcus," she said after one particularly successful reading session, "I've noticed you've been spending extra time with Lucy and Lily lately. How are you feeling about your volunteer work overall?" It was a carefully worded question designed to give him an opportunity to discuss his motivations without feeling defensive. "I enjoy all the children," Marcus said honestly. "But I'll admit that Lucy and Lily hold a special place in my heart. Their resilience and maturity, despite everything they've been through, is remarkable." "It is," Dr. Chen agreed, "but I want to make sure you're maintaining appropriate boundaries. These children have experienced significant trauma, and they need consistency and stability rather than intense adult relationships that might not be sustainable." Marcus understood the warning implicit in her words. She was concerned that his interest in the twins was too intense, too personal, potentially too focused on his own emotional needs rather than their welfare. "I'm not trying to replace anyone in their lives," he said carefully. "I just want to be helpful in whatever way is appropriate." "I know you do," Dr. Chen said gently, "and I appreciate your dedication. Just remember that what's helpful to children isn't always what feels meaningful to adults." That weekend, Marcus made his usual pilgrimage to Riverside Memorial Gardens, but this time he didn't remain in his car. Instead, he parked and walked through the cemetery, ostensibly enjoying the peaceful grounds, but actually timing his stroll to coincide with the Morrison family's arrival. When he spotted them making their way along the main path, he approached, openly rather than watching from a distance. "Good afternoon," he called out as he drew near. "Beautiful day for a walk." The twins brightened when they saw him, their faces lighting up with genuine pleasure at his presence. "Mr. Marcus," Lily called out, "are you visiting someone today?" "Actually," Marcus said, falling into step beside them, "I was hoping I might visit your mother with you, if that would be appropriate. I've been thinking about what you told me about her love of flowers and children, and I'd like to pay my respects." Margaret looked surprised, but not displeased by his request. "I think Catherine would like that," she said after a moment's consideration. She always believed that the more people who remembered someone with love, the more present they remained in the world. Petite. As they approached Catherine's grave, Marcus felt a strange nervousness, as if he were indeed about to meet someone important rather than simply visiting a memorial stone. The twins had made their mother so real through their stories that he almost expected to find her somehow present at the site. The headstone was simple but elegant, engraved with Catherine Morrison's name and dates, along with a brief inscription, "Beloved daughter, mother, and teacher, she planted seeds of love that bloom eternal." Lucy and Lily performed their usual ritual of carefully arranging fresh daisies against the stone. But this time, they also looked expectantly at Marcus, clearly waiting to see how he would choose to honor their mother's memory. Marcus knelt beside the grave, feeling slightly foolish but determined to participate meaningfully in their tradition. "Hello, Catherine," he said quietly. "I wanted to meet you because your daughters have told me so much about you. They're remarkable little girls, and it's clear that you gave them everything they needed to be strong and kind and wise." He paused, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "I want you to know that they're being well cared for by Margaret, and that there are people like me who are committed to making sure they continue to feel loved and supported. You don't have to worry about them. They're going to be just fine." The twins listened to his words with solemn attention, and Marcus realized that his message to their mother was also a promise to them. He was publicly committing himself to their welfare, making himself accountable for their continued well-being. After they completed their visit and were walking back toward the parking area, Lily slipped her small hand into Marcus's. "Thank you for talking to Mom," she said simply. "I think she heard you." The gesture and the words hit Marcus with unexpected force. This 6-year-old child had just given him the gift of inclusion in their most sacred ritual, and her simple faith that her mother had somehow heard his words touched something deep in his chest that he'd thought was permanently sealed. That evening, as Marcus sat in his penthouse reviewing quarterly reports that suddenly seemed trivial and meaningless, he found himself making a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. He was going to rearrange his entire life around being available to the Morrison family in whatever capacity they needed. It wasn't a romantic impulse or a misguided attempt to play savior. It was a recognition that Lucy and Lily Morrison had awakened something in him that had been dormant for decades, the desire to be genuinely needed by people he cared about more than himself. The next morning, Marcus called his executive team into the conference room and announced that he would be stepping back from day-to-day operations of BlackTech Industries. He would remain as CEO and maintain oversight of major strategic decisions, but he was promoting several key executives to handle routine operations. "I want to focus more on philanthropic work and community involvement," he explained to his surprised staff. "The company is stable and profitable. It's time for me to contribute to society in ways that go beyond economic development." His CFO, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, who'd been with the company for 8 years, raised an eyebrow at this announcement. "Marcus, this is pretty sudden," she said. "Are you having some kind of midlife crisis?" Marcus laughed, recognizing that his behavior probably did seem erratic to people who'd known him only as a driven, work-obsessed executive. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But if so, it's the best kind of crisis. I'm finally figuring out what actually matters to me." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into supporting the Morrison family with the same intensity he'd once brought to hostile corporate takeovers. He arranged for a medical alert system to be installed in Margaret's home, connected her with a geriatric care coordinator who could help her manage her various health issues, and quietly ensured that their utility bills and grocery expenses were covered through an anonymous charitable fund he established. He also began spending more time at the Barrett Foundation, not just as a volunteer reader, but as an active board member working to expand their programs and reach more families in need. His business experience proved invaluable in streamlining their operations and securing additional funding from other corporate donors. The twins seemed to blossom under the increased attention and support. Lucy's artwork became more sophisticated and expressive, while Lily's academic performance earned her recognition as one of the most advanced students in her grade. Both girls began speaking more freely during reading sessions and even started approaching other adults with questions and conversations. Margaret's health stabilized with proper medical monitoring and reduced stress about daily necessities. She began attending senior center activities that Marcus had researched and recommended, developing friendships with other elderly people facing similar challenges. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. For the first time in his adult life, he woke up each morning excited about something other than profit margins and market domination. His days had purpose beyond accumulating wealth, and his evenings held the possibility of meaningful interactions with people who valued his character rather than his net worth. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by his social circle. At a charity gala in mid-December, several business associates commented on his improved demeanor and apparent contentment. "You seem different lately, Marcus," observed Patricia Hendricks, the wife of a major client. "More relaxed, more engaged. What's your secret?" Marcus smiled, thinking of 2 little girls who brought daisies to their mother's grave every Sunday and had somehow taught him more about life than decades of business success. "I've been spending time with some remarkable children," he said. "Simply, they've reminded me that the best investments aren't always financial ones." As Christmas approached, Marcus found himself facing a dilemma he'd never encountered before. What to give children who'd lost so much, but who seemed to find joy in the simplest gestures of love and attention. He wanted to do something special for Lucy and Lily, but he also understood that expensive gifts might make them or Margaret uncomfortable. After much consideration, he decided on something that honored their family traditions while creating new possibilities for memory making. He arranged for a professional portrait session with all three Morrisons, providing them with beautiful family photographs they could treasure. He also commissioned a local artist to create a custom illustration of Catherine based on the photographs in their home, showing her surrounded by the flowers she'd loved and the children who continued to honor her memory. When he presented these gifts at the foundation's Christmas party, the reaction was everything he'd hoped for. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she saw the artist's loving recreation of her daughter-in-law, and the twins spent long minutes studying every detail of the portrait. "It looks exactly like her," Lucy whispered, tracing her finger along the painted image of her mother's face. "Now we can see her every day, not just in our memories," Lily added, her voice filled with wonder. But it was Margaret's quiet thank you that meant the most to Marcus. In those two words, he heard acknowledgement not just of the gifts themselves, but of his understanding of what would truly matter to their family. As the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that October afternoon, when he'd first noticed two identical little girls in yellow raincoats walking through a cemetery. He'd entered that period of his life as a successful but isolated man, driven by ambition and competitive achievement. He was ending it as someone who understood the profound satisfaction that came from being genuinely useful to people he loved. But as he prepared for another new year, Marcus also recognized that his relationship with the Morrison family was about to face its greatest test. Margaret's health, while improved, remained fragile. The support systems he'd helped put in place had made their daily life easier, but they couldn't eliminate the fundamental uncertainty that hung over their future. More challenging still was his own growing attachment to Lucy and Lily. What had started as charitable concern had evolved into something much deeper and more complex. He didn't just want to help these children. He wanted to be part of their lives permanently. He wanted to be the person they called when they needed advice, comfort, or celebration. He wanted to be their family. The question that kept him awake at night was whether that desire was based on what was best for them or what was best for him. And as he watched them grow and change under his care, he began to realize that soon he would have to find the courage to explore that question honestly, regardless of where the answer might lead. The first snowfall of winter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early January, blanketing Portland in a pristine white that transformed the familiar cityscape into something magical and new. Marcus stood at his office window watching the flakes drift past, but his mind wasn't on the weather or the quarterly budget review waiting on his desk. Tomorrow marked 4 months since he'd first approached the Morrison family at Riverside Memorial Gardens, and he'd been counting the weeks like a man measuring the distance between his old life and something he couldn't yet name. His assistant knocked softly before entering with his daily calendar. "Mr. Blackwell, you have the foundation board meeting at 2, and Mrs. Morrison called to confirm that you're still planning to attend Lucy's school play tomorrow evening." Marcus turned from the window, a smile automatically crossing his face. At the mention of the twins, "Of course I'll be there. Did she say anything else?" "Just that the girls are very excited about their performance. Oh, and Dr. Chen wants to see you before the board meeting today. She said it was important." A flutter of anxiety moved through Marcus's chest. Important conversations with Dr. Chen usually meant she was concerned about something. And lately, her concerns often centered around his deepening involvement with the Morrison family. The morning passed slowly, his usual focus scattered by anticipation and worry. When he finally knocked on Dr. Chen's office door that afternoon, he found her sitting behind her desk with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, thank you for coming early. Please sit down." He settled into the familiar chair across from her desk, noting the formal tone that suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "I need to discuss something with you," Dr. Chen began carefully. "It's about the Morrison family and your relationship with them." Marcus felt his shoulders tense. Has something happened? Are Margaret's health issues worsening? No, nothing like that. Margaret is doing quite well, actually. The support systems you've helped establish have made a significant difference in their quality of life. Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I've received some questions from our licensing board about the nature of your involvement with this particular family." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Questions? What kind of questions? The kind that arise when a wealthy single man develops an unusually close relationship with children who aren't related to him, Dr. Chen said gently but directly. "Marcus, I know your intentions are pure, but from the outside, your level of involvement looks potentially problematic." Marcus felt heat rise in his face, a mixture of anger and hurt flooding through him. "Are you suggesting that my interest in Lucy and Lily is inappropriate? Because that's not just wrong, it's insulting." "I'm not suggesting anything," Dr. Chen said firmly. "I'm telling you what others are observing and how it might be interpreted. You financially supported this family, you attend all their school events, you visit their mother's grave with them. To people who don't know you as I do, this pattern of behavior raises red flags." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window as he tried to process what he was hearing. "So what are you saying? That I should distance myself from them? Abandon children who've come to trust me because other people might misinterpret my motives? I'm saying that if you want to continue being part of their lives, you need to clarify your role in a way that's legally and socially recognized," Dr. Chen replied. "The ambiguity of your current relationship with them is what's causing concern." Marcus turned back to face her, understanding beginning to dawn. "You're talking about adoption." "I'm talking about making your intentions official, whatever those intentions are," Dr. Chen said. "If you want to be their guardian, there are legal processes for that. If you want to be a family friend with ongoing involvement, that can be documented too. But this informal arrangement, where you're essentially acting as a co-parent without any official recognition, is unsustainable." The room fell silent as Marcus absorbed the implications of her words. He'd been so focused on helping the Morrison family day by day that he hadn't considered how his involvement would be perceived by others or what it might mean for his long-term relationship with the twins. "What would adoption involve?" he asked quietly. Dr. Chen pulled out a folder she'd clearly prepared for this conversation. "It would require Margaret's consent. A formal investigation of your background and living situation, interviews with the children to determine their wishes, and approval from the State Family Services Department. The process typically takes 6 to 8 months. And if Margaret's health deteriorated during that time, if she became unable to care for the girls, they would be placed in emergency foster care while the adoption process continued, assuming you'd already begun the formal proceedings." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach at the thought of Lucy and Lily being placed with strangers, even temporarily. The girls who brought daisies to their mother's grave every Sunday, who still whispered their fears about losing another family member, who had finally begun to trust in the stability of their world with Margaret and him. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course you do, but Marcus, don't take too long. The questions being asked aren't going away. And the longer you wait to formalize your role, the more complicated things could become." That evening, Marcus sat in his penthouse with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking, staring out at the snow-covered city while his mind churned through possibilities and implications. Adoption. The word felt both terrifying and inevitable, like a destination he'd been walking toward without realizing it. Could he really become Lucy and Lily's father? Not just the man who helped with their daily needs and attended their school events, but their legal guardian, the person responsible for every major decision in their lives. The thought filled him with equal measures of longing and terror. He'd never considered himself parent material. His own childhood had been emotionally barren, and his marriage to Victoria had ended partly because they disagreed about having children. She'd wanted them. He'd convinced himself he didn't. Now he wondered if he'd simply been afraid of repeating his parents' mistakes, of becoming another emotionally distant father who provided material advantages but little genuine love. But Lucy and Lily had changed something fundamental in him. Their quiet resilience, their capacity for joy despite their losses, their obvious love for each other and for Margaret, had awakened protective instincts he'd never known he possessed. When Lily slipped her small hand into his at the cemetery, when Lucy shared her artwork with shy pride, when both girls looked to him for comfort or guidance, he felt more genuinely needed than any business deal had ever made him feel. The question wasn't whether he loved them enough to be their father. The question was whether he was capable of being the kind of father they deserved. His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. Margaret's name appeared on the caller ID, and Marcus felt his heart skip with automatic worry about her health. "Hello, Margaret, is everything all right?" "Oh yes, dear, everything's fine," Margaret's voice came through clearly. "I was just calling to remind you about Lucy's play tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the school auditorium." "I wouldn't miss it," Marcus assured her. "How are the girls feeling about their performance?" "Excited and nervous in equal measure," Margaret said with a laugh. "Lucy's been practicing her lines in the mirror for weeks, and Lily's been timing each scene to make sure the play runs exactly 22 minutes as scheduled." Marcus smiled at this perfectly characteristic behavior from both twins. "They're going to be wonderful." "Marcus," Margaret said, her tone shifting slightly, "could I ask you something personal?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Of course. The girls have been asking me questions about family, about what happens to children when their guardians get old or sick. I think they're worrying about my health again, despite all the improvements we've made." Marcus closed his eyes, knowing where this conversation was heading. "I've been thinking," Margaret continued, "about their future, about what would happen to them if something happened to me. I know we have the legal arrangements you helped set up, but those are just temporary measures until more permanent guardians can be found." "Margaret," Marcus said carefully, "what are you asking me?" There was a long pause before she spoke. Again, "I'm asking if you've ever considered becoming more than just their friend and supporter. I'm asking if you might want to become their father." The directness of the question took Marcus's breath away. Here was the conversation he'd been both dreading and hoping for, initiated not by him, but by the woman who knew the twins better than anyone. "I have considered it," he admitted quietly. "More than considered it, actually. But I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to suggest such a thing." "Marcus," Margaret said warmly, "you've been acting like their father for months now. You attend every school event. You know their favorite books and their fears and their dreams. You've made our lives immeasurably better, and more importantly, you've made the girls feel secure and loved." "But I don't know anything about being a parent," Marcus protested. "I don't know how to handle discipline or emotional crises or any of the day-to-day challenges of raising children." Margaret's laugh was gentle but knowing. "Dear, do you think any of us know what we're doing when we become parents? Catherine certainly didn't when the girls were born. I didn't when my son was small. We learn by loving them and doing our best and making mistakes and trying again." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes at her words. "Are you saying you would support an adoption? You would be comfortable with me becoming their legal guardian?" "I'm saying I can't imagine anyone I'd trust more with their care," Margaret said firmly. "You've proven your commitment to their well-being over and over again. And Marcus, the girls adore you. They light up when you arrive, they talk about you constantly when you're not here, and they've started calling you their almost dad when they think I'm not listening. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical force. Almost dad. These children who'd lost both their biological parents, who lived with the constant fear of losing their grandmother, had begun to see him as a potential father figure. What would the process involve? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Well, we'd need to talk to the girls first. Make sure they understand what adoption would mean and that it's what they want, Margaret said practically. Then we'd need to contact a family lawyer and social services to begin the formal process. It won't be quick or simple, but if we're all committed to making it happen, I believe it will. After they ended the call, Marcus sat in his quiet penthouse and tried to imagine his life 6 months from now. Instead of coming home to empty rooms and silence, he might be helping with homework and reading bedtime stories. Instead of quiet, dinners alone, his evenings might be filled with the chatter of 2 6-year-olds sharing their daily adventures. Instead of solitary weekends, he might be attending ballet recitals and science fairs, and yes, continuing the weekly tradition of bringing daisies to Catherine Morrison's grave. The thought should have terrified him. The complete upheaval of his carefully controlled lifestyle, the responsibility for 2 young lives, the vulnerability that came with loving someone more than yourself. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. The next evening, Marcus arrived at the elementary school auditorium 30 minutes before the play was scheduled to begin. He'd brought flowers for both girls, small bouquets they could hold after their performance without being overwhelming. The auditorium was filling with families, the excited chatter of parents and siblings, creating an atmosphere of celebration and community. He found Margaret in the 3rd row, saving 2 seats with her purse and coat. She smiled warmly as he approached, her eyes twinkling with what might have been shared secrets. "They're both completely beside themselves with excitement," she reported, as he settled beside her. "Lucy changed her mind about her hairstyle 3 times, and Lily has been checking her watch every 5 minutes to make sure they stay on schedule." How did they seem when you talked to them about our conversation last night?" Marcus asked quietly. Margaret's smile grew even brighter. "They asked me if it meant you'd be their real dad, and when I said yes, Lucy started planning which bedroom would be yours in whatever house you all end up living in together. Lily wanted to know if adoption meant you'd legally have to help with their math homework every night." Marcus laughed despite his nerves. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that adoption meant you'd be their family forever, no matter what, and that all the details could be worked out together once the paperwork was complete." The lights dimmed before Marcus could respond, and the elementary school's production of The Enchanted Garden began. The story followed a group of young gardeners who discovered that the flowers they tended had magical properties that helped solve problems and bring people together. When Lucy appeared on stage as the lead gardener, Marcus felt his heart swell with pride that surprised him with its intensity. She delivered her lines with confidence and clear expression, her natural, dramatic flair bringing depth to what could have been a simple children's role. Lily played the keeper of the garden's wisdom, a character who knew all the secrets of which flowers had which powers. Her precise delivery and obvious preparation shone through every carefully enunciated word, but it was their scene together that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. The 2 characters, faced with a crisis that threatened their magical garden, joined hands and spoke in unison about the power of family and love to overcome any challenge. "When we stand together, nothing can defeat us," they said, their identical voices blending into one clear declaration. "When we love each other, we can grow anything, survive anything, become anything we dream of being." Marcus glanced at Margaret and saw that she was crying too, understanding as he did that the twins weren't just reciting lines. They were speaking their own truth about resilience and family and the strength that came from being loved unconditionally. After the play ended and the young actors had taken their bows, Marcus and Margaret made their way backstage to find the girls. Lucy and Lily were still in their costumes, their cheeks flushed with excitement and accomplishment. "Mr. Marcus," Lucy called out when she spotted him. "Did you see us? Did we do good?" "You were both absolutely magnificent," Marcus said, kneeling down to their level. "I was so proud of you both, I thought my heart might burst." He handed them their flowers, and both girls beamed with pleasure at the gesture. "Grandma Margaret told us about the adoption papers," Lily said, her directness as characteristic as always. "Does that mean you really want to be our dad?" The question, asked with such innocent hope, nearly undid Marcus completely. He looked into their identical faces, seeing Catherine's eyes and Margaret's wisdom and something uniquely their own, and felt the last of his reservations dissolve. "More than anything in the world," he said honestly, "if that's what you both want too." "Yes," Lucy exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. "We already decided you're the best almost dad ever, so you'll probably be the best real dad too." Lily joined the hug, her arms completing the circle, around Marcus's shoulders. "And it means we'll still live together, even when Grandma Margaret gets really old, right? We won't have to go live with strangers." "Right," Marcus confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll be a family no matter what happens. That's what adoption means." The process of adoption moved faster than Marcus had anticipated, partly because Margaret's wholehearted support simplified many of the usual complications. The background checks, home studies, and interviews were thorough but straightforward. Marcus's financial stability and the obvious bond he'd developed with the twins worked in his favor, as did the girls' clear enthusiasm for the arrangement. During the waiting period, Marcus began the process of creating a home suitable for a family of 3. He purchased a house in southeast Portland, not far from the twins' current school and Margaret's duplex. The house had 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, and most importantly, space for everyone to have privacy while still feeling connected to each other. Lucy and Lily threw themselves into planning their new rooms with the same enthusiasm they brought to everything else. Lucy wanted walls she could hang her artwork on and a reading nook by the window. Lily requested a desk large enough for both homework and science experiments, plus shelving for her growing collection of books about astronomy and biology. Margaret would have her own suite on the first floor, complete with a small sitting area where she could maintain her independence while being close enough for the girls to check on her regularly. The arrangement satisfied everyone's needs while honoring the relationships that had sustained the family through their most difficult times. The weekly cemetery visits continued throughout the adoption process, but now Marcus participated as a full family member rather than a welcomed guest. He began bringing his own flowers to add to the girls' daisies, usually white roses that symbolized remembrance and new beginnings. On one particular Sunday in late spring, as they sat beside Catherine's grave, sharing the week's events with her memory, Lily asked a question that Marcus had been expecting, but still wasn't sure how to answer. "Do you think Mom would like you being our dad?" she asked, her voice thoughtful rather than worried. Marcus considered the question carefully, looking at the headstone that bore Catherine's name and the inscription about planting seeds of love that bloom eternal. "I think your mom wanted you to be loved and cared for by people who would help you grow into the wonderful women she knew you'd become," he said finally. "I think she'd be happy that you found someone who loves you as much as she did, even if that someone is different from what she might have imagined." Lucy nodded solemnly. "We told her about you a long time ago, and we never felt like she was sad about it. We felt like she was glad we found you." The adoption was finalized on a Thursday morning in June, in a courtroom filled with social workers, lawyers, and most importantly, the Morrison family, plus their newest member. Judge Patricia Williams, a kind woman with grandchildren of her own, made the proceedings as warm and personal as possible. "Lucy and Lily Morrison," she said, looking directly at the twins who sat between Marcus and Margaret in the front row. "Do you understand that this adoption means Mr. Blackwell will become your legal father, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with parenthood?" "Yes, Your Honor," they replied in unison, their matching dresses carefully chosen for the occasion. "And do you both want this adoption to take place?" "Yes, Your Honor," they said again, their voices strong and certain. Judge Williams turned to Marcus. "Mr. Blackwell, do you understand that you are taking on the legal and moral responsibility for these children's welfare, education, and emotional development until they reach adulthood?" "I do, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was promising. "And do you commit to loving and caring for Lucy and Lily Morrison Blackwell as your own daughters, regardless of any challenges or difficulties that may arise?" Marcus looked at the two little girls who had changed his entire understanding of what mattered in life, who had taught him that the greatest success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the trust of those who depended on you. "I do, Your Honor," he said, and meant it more than any words he'd ever spoken. When Judge Williams signed the final papers and declared the adoption complete, Lucy and Lily launched themselves from their chairs into Marcus's arms, their excitement finally overflowing the formal constraints of the courtroom. "We're really a family now," Lucy exclaimed. "Forever and ever," Lily added, her practical nature requiring the confirmation of permanence. "Forever and ever," Marcus agreed, holding his daughters close and feeling more complete than he'd ever imagined possible. That Sunday, they visited Catherine's grave as the Morrison Blackwell family for the first time. The twins brought daisies as always, but they also brought a small framed photo of their adoption day, showing all four family members smiling together in the courthouse. "We brought you a picture, Mom," Lucy explained as she carefully arranged the photo against the headstone, "so you can see our whole family together. Dad wanted to be in the picture too," Lily added, the word "Dad" rolling off her tongue as naturally as if she'd been saying it her entire life. "He says he hopes you don't mind sharing us with him." Marcus knelt beside the grave, placing his weekly white roses next to their daisies. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the incredible daughters you raised. I'll love them and protect them and help them remember you for as long as I live." As they sat together in the peaceful cemetery, sharing their weekly conversation with Catherine's memory, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a successful but lonely man who measured his worth in financial achievements and professional recognition. Now, he was a father, part of a family that had formed not through biology, but through choice, commitment, and love. The twins chatted quietly to their mother about their new house, their summer plans, and their excitement about starting second grade in the fall. Margaret dozed peacefully in the spring sunshine, her health stable and her worry about the girls' future finally laid to rest. As they prepared to leave, Lucy and Lily performed their usual ritual of promising to return the following week. But this time they added something new. "We'll bring Dad with us every time, Mom," Lucy said solemnly. "He's part of our Sunday visits now, too." "He says you planted seeds of love that are still growing," Lily added. "And we think he's one of the flowers that grew from your seeds." Walking back to the car, Marcus felt the twins' small hands slip into his, their trust and affection flowing through the simple gesture. In the distance, he could see the groundskeeper, Ben Martinez, waving from beside the maintenance shed. The old man had watched their weekly visits evolve from a grandmother and two grieving children to a complete family, and his smile suggested he understood the significance of what he'd witnessed. As they drove home through the Portland streets, past the Barrett Foundation, where their story had really begun, past the parks and playgrounds where they'd built their relationship. Marcus thought about the profound truth the twins had spoken. At Catherine's grave, love really did plant seeds that continued to grow and bloom long after the gardener was gone. Catherine Morrison had planted seeds of love in her daughters that had attracted him to their family. Margaret had nurtured those seeds and allowed them to grow into something larger. And now, as Lucy and Lily Morrison Blackwell, they would carry that love forward into whatever adventures awaited them. The millionaire, who had once watched two little girls bring flowers to their mother's grave every Sunday, had indeed broken down, but not in the way anyone might have expected. He'd broken down the walls he'd built around his heart, broken down his assumptions about what constituted success, broken down his resistance to the vulnerability that came with loving someone more than yourself. In their place, he'd built something infinitely more valuable, a family based on choice rather than chance, strengthened by shared loss and united by hope for the future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.